Hello, my name is Hari with USC's Young Scientists Program, and I'm here hanging out with my new friend. We actually have a lot in common. We both like going on hikes, we like playing video games, and we're both made up of cells. Well, he's made up of plant cells, and I'm made up of animal cells, and there are some key differences between those that we're going to learn about today. Let's get started. We are going to be learning about something very different today as we shift to start learning about biology. And the basis of all biology is cells. Everything that is living is made up of cells, and that could be you or me or grass or trees outside, to dogs and cats, to carrots and cucumbers in your fridge. Even though all life is made up of cells, those cells can be either animal cells, seen on the left, or plant cells, seen on the right. Let's take a look at what's inside either of these types of cells, starting with the animal cell. Just like us humans have organs, like our brain, our heart, our lungs, and our stomach, our cells have their own, and we call those organelles. Let's learn about the different organelles found in each of these cells, starting with the nucleus. The nucleus is the control center of the cell, kind of like a brain. This is where all DNA is stored, which is the blueprint for your whole body. Next, we have the cell membrane, which is the outer layer that's kind of like the cell's skin. It controls what goes in and out. Next up is the mitochondria, which is where the cell breathes, just like your lungs. The mitochondria is also responsible for making the cell's energy. After that, we have the vacuoles, and the vacuoles are a cell's storage system. Food, nutrients, and waste are all stored in the vacuoles until they need to be sent somewhere else. After that are the ribosomes, which are tiny dots that are responsible for creating proteins inside the cell. And finally is the cytoplasm, which is all the empty space. Everything we just talked about floats in the cytoplasm. Now, as we move on to plant cells, you're going to see a lot of stuff that's familiar, like the nucleus, the mitochondria, the vacuoles, the cell membrane, the ribosomes, and the cytoplasm. But there are a couple new organelles that are only found in plant cells, starting with the cell wall. The cell wall is what gives plant cells a structure and is super rigid. This is why plant cells are rectangular, while animal cells are more blob-like. Next up are the chloroplasts, which are the green ovals, which are extremely important. They help plants make their own food by taking in energy from the sun and turning it into sugar through a process called photosynthesis. Basically, they function as the plant's solar panels. To make sure that we understand animal and plant cells a little bit better, we're going to create some of our own models and then discuss what some of the key differences are between the two types of cells. Before we get to our models, let's look at this week's featured scientist, Barbara McClintock. She was a researcher at Cornell University, specifically focusing on botany, which is the study of plants. Her research on DNA, which is found in the nucleus of a cell, like we learned today, led her to receive a Nobel Prize in medicine in 1983. She was able to make breakthroughs on how genes were passed on in plants, specifically the different colors of corn kernels. Knowing what happens inside the plant cells was essential to making these important discoveries. For today's activity, we're going to be creating our own models of animal and plant cells, and you can use whatever art supplies you might have at home. Feel free to pause the video whenever you feel like it so you can follow along with the steps I'm doing on your screen. Let's start with the animal cell. The first thing I'm going to do is use some blue pipe cleaners to represent the cell membrane on the outer layer of the cell. After that, I'm going to get a blue pom-pom and stick it to the center to represent the nucleus. Red pom-poms will represent the mitochondria, and white pom-poms will represent the vacuoles. Lastly, I have some pink sequins that I'm going to use a glue stick to stick to my paper plate, which will be the ribosomes for our animal cell. And that does it for the animal cell, just using a handful of art supplies that you might find around your house. For our plant cells, instead of using a paper plate, we're going to use a rectangular piece of paper. This is because plant cells have cell walls, which makes them more rigid and hold a firm shape. Again, I'll be using pipe cleaners to represent the cell wall and the cell membrane, with the purple pipe cleaners representing the cell wall and the blue pipe cleaners representing the cell membrane. Just like last time, a blue pom-pom will represent the nucleus and white pom-poms will represent the vacuoles. Red pom-poms will represent the mitochondria, but plant cells have something different, which is the green pom-poms to represent the chloroplasts. Remember, the chloroplasts are what allow the plant cells to do photosynthesis. After that, plant cells also have ribosomes, so we'll glue the pink sequins to the plant cell, just as we did with the animal cell. And here's our final model of a plant cell. Let's go ahead and place them side by side so we can take a look at some of the similarities and differences. Okay, last thing we gotta do is compare what our animal cell looks like compared to our plant cell. A big thing you might notice is the shape. Animal cells are more round and plant cells are very rectangular. This is because the plant cells have a cell wall, which is used to give them support. Plants spend their whole lives staying in one place, whereas animals are free to move around, so plant cells have to have that extra support. The other thing you might notice is that plant cells have the green pom-poms to represent chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are necessary so that the plant cells can do photosynthesis and create their own food. Us humans don't need to do photosynthesis because we can eat, but in case you're curious, we're going to learn more about photosynthesis next week. Finally, in case you're curious, this is what animal cells and plant cells actually look like underneath the microscope. Animal cells have a blob-like shape, and plant cells have a more rigid structure, exactly what we talked about. And that does it for today's lesson. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week when we learn about photosynthesis.